Well, good evening, everybody. Sorry, we've been kind of making sure sound and the setup is all good. You think at this point we're used to Zoom, but it takes some of us a little bit. But my name is Joanna Wright. I am the Athens-Clarke County Extension Agriculture and Natural Resources Program Assistant. It's a really long title, but I help with all the programs that we run here. The name on the screen is obviously not me. That's Laura Ney, our Agriculture and Natural Resources Agent. And she's not able to be here this evening, so I'm representing us. But if you have any questions or would like any information on other programs we offer or services that we offer, you are more than welcome to reach us on our contact info on this slide. And also you can find us on Facebook. We have an e-newsletter you're welcome to email me and subscribe to. And we also have a fun little Instagram with gardening tips and whatnot that we try to post frequently on. So tonight is our July Green Thumb lecture. I'm glad everybody's here. It's nice to see lots of people online tonight. And tonight we'll be going through learning about gardening with pollinators, which is a really timely topic. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm seeing pollinators all over the place this summer, and that's really exciting. And so I will go through a couple housekeeping things before we get started. So throughout the talk, if everyone could just stay muted so that our presenter doesn't get confused or there's no interruptions, but you're more than welcome to ask questions in the chat box. And you can type those questions in at any point. I may interrupt her at certain points to answer some of those questions. There may be some that we save to the end, but I'll definitely make sure to keep an eye on that so your question does not get missed. So we may answer questions throughout. We may save some of them for the end as well. But definitely feel free to ask them in the chat box. So to kind of get the ball rolling on that, if everybody could put in the chat box maybe where you are watching this from, like the city or whatever, and your favorite pollinator, whether it's a honeybee or carpenter bee, a butterfly, or something more unique. Feel free to just go ahead and do that so everyone's comfortable in the chat box. So where you're watching from and your favorite pollinator your favorite pollinator. So thank you for those who are getting a head start on that. Thank you. Lots of honeybee lovers. All righty, well, I won't hold us up anymore. So our speaker tonight is Anna Yellen. She is one of our master gardeners, and she also works for DNR. And I'll let her kind of share what she does, but she'll be giving the presentation this evening. And I will stop sharing and go ahead and let you share, Anna. There we go.
That's not my person. Okay. I think I have it. Sorry, I thought I
You're
was
good.
completely comfortable with how I was sitting, but I don't see my screen now.
Take your time, you're fine.
Oh, okay. I think it's my here. Okay.
Is giving you trouble?
I am afraid. I was trying to get to the speaker view where I saw people's faces a little bit, but I couldn't. I don't seem to be doing that, unfortunately, again. So maybe it's because I have my chat box open.
Did you hit the share screen button yet?
Oh, this might work. Okay. Yes. Oh, I think I was sharing the wrong one potentially. I'm not really sure.
Okay, well, we can see your presentation if that helps.
Do you see it? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Perfect.
I got my husband sitting across from me now so that I'm not staring at my screen only because I can't see you all. So just let me know if you're talk if instead of motion because I can't see you all. Okay. Well, All right, so thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest in creating a pollinator garden. Like Joanna said, I'm Anna Yellen. I work for the Wildlife Conservation section of Georgia DNR. And although I do environmental reviews, my passion is working with terrestrial invertebrates. So first, just a little bit of an outline about what I'm going to talk about. Creating the pollinator garden. I wanted to talk about the benefits of the pollinator garden, such as to the species that you might be interested in, but also the collective benefits to other species and to people. How would you go about designing your pollinator garden? There's a lot of really cool tools out there, because sometimes I know just myself, I felt a little bit overwhelmed by all the different things to consider. And also communicating with your community to aid just in general in terrestrial invertebrate, pollinator, bee, butterfly conservation. First, I wanted to mention that these are pictures of my pollinator garden. They're just not pretty necessarily, but they are pretty to the pollinators. My yard is full of lots of partially eaten plants, lots of dead leaves, very seasonal, but it seems to be the case of a lot of people that are really interested in pollinators. They're definitely not going to be groomed and look like a very manicured lawn. I wanted to also just do a little bit of a refresher in terms of pollination. Mainly when we're talking pollinators, we're dealing with cross-pollination. Self-pollination, it could take place. That's usually, it's involving just within one flower or within one plant, the pollen's going from flower to flower or within the flower. But with cross-pollination, it uses an agent of some sort to pollinate with another plant. And that could be that it's water, such as like water plants, water lilies, wind, like with a lot of grasses and some trees. But then a lot of our flowering plants, it's going to be animals, and a lot of them are cross-pollinating, like that little video on the right. And in terms of just the anatomy of a flower, we have the male on the left, female on the right, as far as the little labels. They definitely look very similar, but in terms of the labels, that's showing you some of the parts of a flower. So one of the things a lot of people say that bees are the pollinators. And yes, it's true. They are intentional pollinators. But there's a lot of pollinators out there that aren't necessarily intentional pollinators. There are about 75% of flowering plants, as an estimation, are pollinated by insects. And that's not just bees, it's lots of different insects out there. Some of the smallest little ants are pollinators. We have beetles. Pretty much anything that can carry pollen can be a pollinator. But the bees do contribute a large amount to the economy of the US and also the food security of the US and worldwide. However, you could say that about 15% are pollinated of our foods are pollinated by domestic bees, and then about 80% are pollinated by wild bees and other wildlife. So it's really incredibly important to try to work on conserving all of these other species. But in terms of bees really are designed to pollinate. They have little pollination pouches, and until I started staring at pollinators more, I never really noticed those big thighs on the bees, and that's pollen that they're holding, which I think is just really cool to realize just how busy they are going from plant to plant to plant. But so that's our bees, a lot of them that we might see out there. They're not all species and not all different taxa of bees. All right. I popped a different slide in there than I was expecting. I will just, there we go. There's my amazing diversity pictures. Those are some of the other inverts that are pollinating flowers. And I also wanted to mention that most of these pictures I took in my yard, which is just in a subdivision outside of Athens. So I get a huge number of visitors. Some of them aren't in my yard, but a lot of them are. And here's some really cool pollinators with pollen. And these actually aren't from my yard. These are off the internet. But here are some of the insects, different flies, fly mimics, beetles with pollen all over their faces because they don't have the pollen pouches. We get our little hummingbirds getting a little pollen on their beaks. And I'm also going to add in here bats, just because this bat is really cool looking. Bats in Georgia do not pollinate, but they do eat our pollinators. And if you're building a pollination garden, you're also providing a great resource for bats. Gonna bounce back to that slide. Okay, so entomologists estimate that there are about 3 times the number of insect species for every plant species in Georgia, and they believe that there are about 3,600 native plant species in Georgia. So when you're creating a pollinator garden, you have a lot of options out there, different types of plants, different types of insects, and you'll see quite an amazing assortment throughout your seasons. But when you say the word pollinator, that does not rule out vegetables and fruits. In fact, vegetables and fruits are a really good way to have a pollination garden and provide food for other wildlife. So here are some of the pictures of some of the vegetables and fruits that you can grow in a pollinator garden. There's strawberries, there's mint on the bottom. Mountain mint is absolutely loved by a lot of pollinators. We have blueberries, and that picture on the right is not from Athens, though I just found out that Athens has started growing bananas. So that's a picture of a banana plant with a hummingbird. Doug Telemate is very well known, and some of you have probably heard him speak about insects, pollination, and their importance. And he's a really good speaker. So I wanted to have him speak, and I will follow up with some of the things that he says. Let's see. Oops, sorry, that wasn't supposed to happen. Oh my. All right, we're going back to Doug Telemate.
Animals. Absolutely every animal on this planet gets its food directly from plants. Gets its food either by eating a plant or by eating something else that ate the plant. And that's because plants are the only organisms that can capture the sun's energy and turn it into food. The most important group of animals that take energy from plants and pass it to other animals are the insects that eat plants. We'll call them insect herbivores. And most insect herbivores are only able to eat a particular group of plants. And we call that specialization. They can only eat the plants that they have co-evolved with, because plants defend themselves with nasty chemicals, and it takes long periods of time for insects to develop the physiological ability to digest those chemicals. When we create a meadow, we are in effect restoring an ancient food web. This works best if we use the native plants that were originally part of that food web. We'd like to favor native plants because the insect herbivores that evolved where you want to put your meadow evolved in concert with those native plants. They have specialized on those native plants over many, many thousands of years, which have enabled those insects to eat them. Those same insects have no evolutionary exposure to plants that evolved in China or Europe. They won't be able to eat these plants. They won't be able to digest them. They won't even recognize them as food plants. So if you're creating a meadow, choose plants that are native to your area, the country. A good example of an insect that specializes on one group of plants because of that plant's chemistry is our friend the monarch butterfly. It eats milkweeds and nothing else because it's able to break down the nasty chemicals that are in milkweeds, but it's unable to digest any other type of plant. If we cut milkweeds down then, monarch larvae cannot crawl off and eat some other type of plant. So if we destroy the plants that these insect herbivores have specialized on, they will have nothing to eat and will be doomed to extinction. So stop and think about it. So many animals depend on insects for their food. All amphibians, for example, eat insects. So do many reptiles and rodents. And 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects. If we replace our native plants with non-native plants, then all of those animals won't have enough to eat. And that'll hit biodiversity very hard. And of course, that's exactly what we've done by creating lawns and landscaping with non-native plants that evolve outside of our local ecosystems. So remember what a meadow is all about. It's not just a beautiful place, but it's a place where things can live. Living things have two requirements. They need food and they need a place to live. Your meadow provides both. It provides food because of the plants that you put in your meadow. And if you put many different types of plants in your meadow, you'll have a diversity of food for a diversity of insects, and you'll have a diversity of natural enemies that will eat those insects. And the meadow provides habitat, hiding places, those little niches where the birds and the other meadow creatures can nest and rear their young. Planting a native wildflower meadow is so much more beautiful and dynamic, both structurally and in terms of species, than planting a monoculture such as a lawn. Somebody once said that gardening is a way of showing that you believe in tomorrow. And I think that's never been more true than today, because the way we garden, the way we create places like meadows, is going to determine what life looks like tomorrow.
So I just think he says that wonderfully, but I wanted to point out or just bring up again some of the things that he mentioned in the video. The use of native plants, which provide food that they can identify. It provides habitat. It definitely protects our natural heritage. And also the genetic diversity by not modifying different species. They require less maintenance often because they have evolved in this kind of ecology. And they, as a result, also they require fewer artificial chemicals to maintain them. And so they're just healthier for the planet in general. So I am going to bring this up again later, but this is a really cool tool that is out there to help decide what types of plants you might want to put out in the garden. I know it can be pretty overwhelming with all the choices that are out there. So I like using these types of tools to get a little bit more control and a little bit more like not feel overwhelmed by all the different options. And I'll bring this up later again. So as like Telemate mentioned, a lot of insects are specialists, but fortunately, a lot of the adult insects are also generalists. So when you plant for potentially one species, a lot of other species are getting the benefit. This is actually kind of close to Athens, about an hour away, where there's just an amazing amount of butterfly weed. And when I was out there just a couple weeks ago, I actually saw a monarch, which I thought was really nice. I saw swallowtails, I saw honeybees. In fact, I actually saw a wild honeybee nest in one of the hollow trees near there. And they were all sharing the resources out there, which also made me realize, just thinking about it, how important this plant is as a resource for lots of different species, because it has such a long flowering time that it kind of fills in some of the gaps during crop times. So not only is it really good for monarchs, but it helps keep a continuous, helps with maintaining a lot of nectar supply throughout the season, which is something that I wanted to mention. It's something that should be considered when creating a pollinator garden, to try to extend your season by having early spring flowers later in the season, throughout the summer and into the fall. But as he also mentioned, that 90% of the insects that eat plants can develop and reproduce only on the plants with which they share that evolutionary history. So the native insects really require the native plants, and a lot of them, it is due to the life history. For example, here's a monarch larva and black swallowtail larva. And these monarch larvae are starting, I believe this is swamp milkweed, and being on swamp milkweed, they actually can't even switch. They might be on a milkweed, but they can't switch to another Asclepias species. They can't go to butterfly weed. They have to be raised the entire time, from the time they hatch out of their eggs to the time that they go into their chrysalis on swamp milkweed. Black swallowtails, they feed on parsley family plants. I don't know if the same is true. I don't know if they can switch, but I do know from my experience with monarchs that they may not be able to switch between species of plant either. And definitely not beyond plants in the parsley family. There's both those caterpillars a little bit later in life. They look a lot different. But then as they become older, they definitely are more generalist, both species. And so I just wanted to point that out. But the same is actually true in terms of life species, not just with insects, but also other species out there higher up on the food web. Although they're not specifically needing specific species, these are chickadees, and chickadees really do require a lot of caterpillars. Caterpillars are packed solid, and they're very easy with nutrition, and they're really easy for their parent, for the mama caterpillar or mama chickadee to carry. So it's estimated that with a brood of 5 chicks, the parent needs to carry over about 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, which is absolutely incredible. So we definitely need to be providing food out there in terms of pollinator gardens. Those pollinator gardens have benefits to the chicks, they have benefits to predatory insects, and then higher up on the food chain, they have benefits to frogs, small snakes, lizards, and then those that also eat the frogs, small snakes, and lizards. So here, this is like a little break in case there was anything in the chat that I can't see.
We don't have any questions
Okay.
right now, but feel free if anybody has any, put them in the chat and I can ask her.
Okay. So garden design. So there's 4 necessary components in a garden. You have to provide food, resources, water, cover, and places for the young to be raised. And this garden in the background is actually in front of the visitor center at Hard Labor Creek State Park. One of the things when starting off your garden is you're going to want to remove the invasive plants, and we definitely have a lot out there. And I know for master gardeners, there's the advanced training right now going on for invasive plant notification. I'm not really sure what it's called, but yeah, so I know that that's a great program to help master gardeners learn about these invasive plants that might come up in the garden. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you all. And this is the native plant finder. So hopefully this works. Is this obvious on the screen that I've got? No, my husband's shaking his head. No, you can't see it. Okay.
I need to see a black screen.
Bummer. All right. All right. Well, you'll get the slide, I guess. And afterwards, if we have time and we want to go back to any of these, I can show you how to use them. Basically, this is a tool that will make it just helps out and makes some of the options for planting a little bit less overwhelming. Instead of needing to go pour through books, in this case, let's say you want to look at a butterfly, you can find the species of butterfly that you're interested in attracting, and you can find what plants will provide resources for it. And create a list too. That's one of the options also. Save them, create a list, and then at the end, you have a great list. In terms of native plants, I also wanted to mention that there's something called native cultivars, which aren't necessarily the same as native species. Some of them have been bred to exhibit certain characteristics that might be desirable. So they might, in the same time, lose some of their genetic diversity. And also, there's concern that some of these native cultivars might not provide the landing pads that some of these insects need. They might not have as much nectar as some of the more native varieties with more diversity. So when choosing plants, you might want to try to steer towards those with sort of some of the more native plant stores will provide those species and varieties that aren't necessarily as bred for certain characteristics. Designing the garden, there's a lot of things to consider. There's the placement of your garden, whether you're going to be in a sunny location or shady is a lot of times tough to figure out what plants to plant. So that's something to consider. Duration of when you're going to be in the location. If you're renting for a season, you might want to opt for container gardens. But if you are going to be in the same place for years, like I always go for perennials because I find it so much easier not to have to worry about it every year, any replantings, and it's economically a lot easier too. So size, container gardens, do you want to make borders? Do you have a backyard or do you have several acres? All of those options provide awesome resources. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that insects are really cool because when they lay eggs, they lay eggs. And so you might think you have a small space, but you could really, in your small space, produce like hundreds of offspring just with one individual laying eggs. So it's really creating a pollinator really creates a community. Plant choices, what do you hope to attract and what should be avoided? And I have a few slides on different things that may cause some problems with the pollinator garden later on in this presentation. I also wanted to mention, because that's something that sometimes gets a little confusing, is the design of the pollinator garden. You definitely want to think about trying to have a garden that will produce flowers over multiple seasons. And that's tough, but fortunately, there are lots of planting guides out there that can help you with that. And some of them, like that other one, are online, which makes it even more easier. So sunny versus shady. I have a little bit of animation going on here for this one. I wanted to mention, if you are in the shade, you definitely have to find plants that will accommodate that, but you might get really lucky. You might be able to get a lot of the frogs out there too, a lot of really cool salamanders, as well as your invertebrates that you are planting for. Sunny gardens, that's definitely a lot easier if you want to get bees and you want to get butterflies. You can get butterflies in the shade, but you're going to be aiming more for some of the, potentially the grasses even, to get the satyrs, which might be found more in the shadier locations. How long are you going to be in your location? So that's something like, if you are renting, if you're a student, you might just want to consider an annual garden or a container garden that you can carry with you. But in any case, just providing that garden provides an excellent resource for these butterflies. It can be a location that they come to daily, or it could be a stopover place as they travel several miles, like a migratory insect, for example. However, if the place you're living at is more permanent, you can provide probably more diversity in terms of habitat for the larger species. You might be able to provide areas that will have repeated nesting from birds for several years, because if they have a successful nest, birds will generally come back to the same location. How large will your garden be? I wanted to mention, so some of the plants I was listing that you can put into a smaller patio garden. And some of them definitely are food plants, so you can share your plants with, you can eat them also. And when you're designing your garden, one of the reasons that you might find that certain plants are better than other plants are the shapes that the insects have evolved to take nectar from the plants from. I just love the way, like, you have some of the butterflies and hummingbirds, and they have their little proboscis, they stick them out and can really dive into some of those plants, but not all insects will. So these are going to be, some of these examples will really like some of the flowers that have more of a tubular structure. The different species also visit different colored plants. Reds, hummingbirds love reds. And I was laughing the other day because my husband came in and told me that a hummingbird was pretty much chasing him. And I asked him if he was, I was like, oh, you're wearing red, huh? And he said, yes. And the hummingbird thought he was some big flower in our backyard. I guess we need to add more flowers out there. But also, like different butterflies, like brightly colored flowers. Some of the birds, purples, yellows, and let me see. Okay, here's more about hummingbirds, just the shape of the different types of flowers and environments and feeding locations you can create. This is the slide I was looking for. Color. So a lot of people are really interested in creating gardens that might also attract bats. And in order to attract bats, one of the great ways to do so is to attract the moths that they will eat. And so some of the flowers that you would put into that type of a garden you wouldn't really think of the pinks and reds as much as the whites and yellow flowers. And night blooming flowers would be a big thing, and ones that actually have a lot of scent to them. So evening primrose is a very popular type of flower if you want to create something that would be attractive to moths and therefore attractive to bats. Here are some more yellows and whites. And these gardens can be beautiful. You wouldn't necessarily want to add some light to the gardens, but if you have like those full night, those really clear nights with a full moon, they can just seem to glow. And the Brazilian free-tail bat is one that you might see in your garden around here. And that's also have a little bit of a diversity as to what they prefer. And these are just a few of the bats that you would find in this area and some of the foods that they eat. Different beetles, different moths. Oops. Okay, so here's a little bit more on garden design. Okay. Oh, that was my pause. I'm sorry. Joanna?
We did have, I was just curious, this does not apply to what you're talking about right now, but will you at all go through the monarch life cycle in this presentation?
A little bit, and I can make sure I do.
Okay.
I can make sure I do. Yeah, thank you.
That's the one, that's the one question we have so far.
Okay, cool.
And
well,
then-
that's like the one species I probably know the most about right now. So that's
sweet.
That's wonderful.
Alrighty.
Okay, pools. I just wanted to mention that when you're creating your garden and your environment for them, just how much like it's really easy for that to like come up with different solutions on what to use. In my yard, I have baby pools that I pulled out after my kids were a little too old for them. I've dug them into the ground and I use them and have definitely created places that have brought me a lot of different frogs. In fact, like I put my plants a lot of times in these baby pools with water, so I don't have to water all of them. And as a result, sometimes I'll walk by and I found that there's new tadpoles in there. So even just a bucket out there, you might end up having some tadpoles show up. So pools mimicking mimicking ponds, not farms. And there's some more types of ways to create resources in the garden. But I did want to mention this. There's actually another type of illness besides the ones that I'm mentioning on this slide that they have not figured out exactly what's going on. And it's just been showing up this year. There's a lot of concern about feeders and also even water resources and just the way that birds may show up in really high densities because of these resources. So sometimes you might hear that there's some sort of an illness going around and the recommendation is to take down your feeders, to clean them out real well and to wait until the coast is clear basically in terms of illness before putting them up again. So some of the resources that are great to leave in the garden is leaves. Don't rake the leaves so much. Those will create places for salamanders and lizards and snakes to have babies, the little chipmunks to have babies. Keep maintaining some of the snags, the dead trees that might be in the yards, as long as they're not right near your house. That's a great way to provide areas for wildlife. However, if you have to take down snags, you might want to put in boxes. The boxes generally have a design, like if you go into a store and you see bluebird box, it really is targeting bluebirds, but you have to prepare the environment around the box to also be attractive to bluebirds, such as you don't want to put their boxes in an area with a lot of trees. You want to have the area pretty much cleared of, you want to put them in a field more on top of a fence post maybe, and have that's particular size opening for them to be able to go in. You might even want to put some sort of cover on it with metal so that it's not chewed up by other animals. Otherwise, you won't have bluebirds coming there anymore. You'll have somebody else coming there. But bees too, that's another thing that people have been starting to get more into, is creating different areas for bees. So we have our solitary nesters, and those are really great to create habitats for, although I have been hearing also that you have to make sure that you clean them out every year. And then of course, the honeybees. The honeybees, like the one I recently saw in the wild, was in a tree just like this. But here we are mimicking them with our honeybird houses, honeybee houses, and bat boxes. So they do require sunlight because they want to see, the bats are going to want to be warm inside. There are specific designs for them, which are available on the web, and they are good to put up high. In DNR, actually, we've been putting up bat boxes sometimes if a bridge has to have maintenance done on it, because a lot of bats might go under bridges. We also have been enjoying putting up boxes near different moth gardens, like the one I showed you before. And I wanted to show you, this is really cool, a bat box from the inside. And it'll, yeah, there they come. They're going to be in there a little more soon. They're really, and this was off the internet. So there's a few little comments in there. These are Brazilian freetail bats, and these are one of the species that if you put up a bat box in this area, that you'd have a really likely time of seeing. Oops, I call them Brazilian. I think they have both names actually. How do I keep going? Oops. All right. There we go. Okay. But I did want to mention something else that you should consider when preparing your gardens and your wildlife houses, is the how vulnerable all of these small animals are to cats. There was actually a research study done a few years ago where somebody put at UGA, and a student put little video cameras on cats to see everything, to see some of the things that they were getting. And the cat owners had no idea how many small frogs and mice and insects and birds their cats were actually getting. So they were very surprised and somewhat horrified to find out just how many were dying by the cats that had food at their houses. Also, another type of animal to consider that there's been some concern about is fireflies. And here are some guidelines for creating a space for fireflies. And it just goes along with all the others. You don't want to use a lot of herbicides. You don't want to use pesticides. Having some water in the area. Native plants. You might want to have some of the grass be a little longer, but all of these pollinators really like that too. And a lot of times they will have their larvae will mature in pine needles and maybe like some piles of sticks and such. One of the big things though is to reduce your outdoor lighting. So one of the recommendations is if you use sort of motion sensor lights for your outdoors instead of using porch lights, closing your curtains at night, that's a big thing to try to reduce the extra light, because some of them they're finding are breeding less as a result of so much light out there. They're having a harder time communicating. So that, as well as some of the other environmental changes, have been probably reducing the numbers a lot. And here's just a little bit about pesticides. So I know that sometimes, you know, people try to target certain insects. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's not just those that will have a reaction to the pesticides. The dead insects will be providing what the lizards think are awesome food resources, but unfortunately they and their offspring will suffer. So I know sometimes there's calls in the master gardener office with people asking why all the insects in their yard have died and not just certain ones that they were trying to get. And that's just a cautionary word to make sure that pretty much if you put it out, it kills everything. So there's different kinds. There's contact pesticides, which are really fast in terms of what they will do. And there's also systemic pesticides, which these are a lot harder to identify. These could be some that are, it could be that they have powder on the seed of a plant, and when it grows, the plant has some sort of a systemic pesticide within it, so that when something that would eat the plant bites, it could die, just like kind of like that picture over there at the top. So it could be that they're genetic, like it could be that the plant has been somewhat genetically modified to have some more resistance to pests, to herbicides, so they can withstand it, but the insects can't. Or it can be that the pesticides are actually, that they're really going through the plant from the roots to the leaves. And in terms of the impact over time, they found that it's not just that pesticides will instantly kill the insects. It might make it so that they are not able to survive in the long term. They might not be able to breed. So it's not just something that happens right away, but it's something that can happen along the time. In fact, there was one research study that I read about that was in Europe, where they were capturing butterflies that were just flying past a field where there had been pesticide application, not even landing. And they actually found that they had really poor survivorship after going in that area. So this, going into the part about more like community outreach. So this is pause. Joanna, is there anything else?
Yeah, that's perfect timing. So you didn't get into this specifically, but one of our participants, Dave, he asks, how does spraying for mosquitoes impact pollinators? There's a company that's been advertising around town, he says, and lots of people are using their service, and I think he's kind of concerned about that.
So when I was actually preparing for this, I was reading up, and there was a news article. It was somewhere in the Midwest where a lot of people were angry that the county had done some mosquito spraying and they had killed hundreds and hundreds of monarchs. So it definitely affects them. I have heard that there's little drop-ins that might not cause the same problems. So like if you have pools of water, I've heard from people that the little things that you can put in the water will not impact the pollinators, but I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah,
But
like we talked
yeah,
about
the
the little
mosquito
the
spraying,
dunks.
yeah, it
Mhm.
gets them all.
Mhm. Thank
Unless
you.
there's some sort of method and chemical that I'm not aware of. That could definitely be the case, but I
Yeah,
don't know about it.
yeah. I've looked into it myself, and not just for mosquitoes, but just, using pesticides in gardens. And a lot of it really does depend on what's being used. And like you brought up, the contact versus systemic, because some are very, very specific to the pest and others are not. So yeah, it really depends on what's being used. Thank you. That was it for that
Okay.
question.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention that one person, one garden. It's like the concept of it takes a village. Everybody really does make a difference. Here's some examples just of a garden. And you can see on the left, that one, that's milkweed there, and just some of the monarch caterpillars that came out of the eggs there. In fact, like last year, I had milkweed plants out, and I think I raised about 200 just from one laying, one female laying eggs, and I was raising them for an education project. They actually take a lot of time to raise, but that's just one example that it really makes a big difference. But here also, I wanted to show you so one thing that's really important also is the pathways going across to different places and providing nectar sources over these flyways, really, especially for these migratory species. So I created this. So in Atlanta, that's a picture of Atlanta. There's a lot of people that are gardening out there, and these connections that they're forming are just awesome. So, okay, there was a question about monarchs, and I don't have a particular slide about it, but in terms of their development and natural history, so usually there's about 4 generations, let's say. It could be 3 or 4 generations of monarchs. They start off where there's some that come out of Mexico on our side, the eastern population. They come out, they will start flying out of Mexico or in the springtime. Around February might be the first ones that people see. And those are a population that kind of overwintered, and then they lay their eggs. They'll lay their eggs maybe around here, and then they'll start that second generation. Believe that it's about a month or 2 that each generation survives. They start off, they go from caterpillar to chrysalis and then to butterfly. It takes about 10 days for them to come out of their chrysalises. And then that generation flies farther north a lot of times, or they may stay, but we don't really see a huge number staying in Georgia. A lot of them do migrate. So that generation will go more northwards, and then they'll lay their eggs. And finally, it ends up that they'll be up north, and then there's an overwintering generation that actually survives for 9 months. And those actually, they even have tougher wings. They're kind of more resilient because they're going to have the longest flight. They're not going to have their flights broken up. And those are the ones that go to Mexico. And I have a picture a little bit farther on of some of the tagging. They are trying to get an idea of exactly where they're going and their survivorship. And I can't remember if it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago, it was first discovered that they were going to Mexico. And that was done, they discovered that through tagging. And it was actually one person that really led the effort and got the community all over involved. And now we're also looking at, can they be going other places? We're looking specifically in this area is if there's overwintering populations that aren't breeding, or if there's populations that are continuing to breed in maybe not the best times of the year for them to breed and they're staying. But that's just a little bit. So in the spring, we'll see them coming up, going north in around February, March, and April. And that some of examples of plants that you might want to have out there for them are native azaleas that might be blooming, sumac, and also weeds are really awesome. They love dandelions. Then you'll have a lot of resources out there during the summer, and in the fall, it's also kind of tricky for them because so many plants have dried up. So they really asters, a lot of asters are blooming around that time, goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, and they say about 20% of plants maybe in your garden can be non-native and you're still sort of helping things along. So I do plant Mexican sunflower because they, it's a really, there's a lot of nectar in them, and I definitely have seen the monarchs coming through and landing on them. There's also a link that I know is not going to show up if I push it, so I won't, but it'll be in the slides, which tells you a bunch of plants that you can plant for monarchs in this area and other areas of the country. Oh, and here, actually, this is a video that I took, and you can see it's kind of hard to see, but there's a lot of butterflies flying and some dragonflies. And this is along the coast of Jekyll this past October. Started again. And it's amazing. If you haven't been out there in October over on the coast to see the butterfly migration, it's just, it's really amazing to see what's going on. And all of these little guys, we're needing your gardens as a resource in this area because they have to come down I think they come every night and they'll sip nectar. And during the day, they'll sip nectar. So they really need those stepping stones along the way. And on the left of this picture, there's some of the other migratory insects. There's a lot of migratory insects. I think we're just learning a little more about them. But there's the Gulf fritillary on the right top. There's red saddleback dragonfly and the cloudless sulfur in that picture. And those are just some of the species that I saw on Jekyll this past October. So that was kind of like stuff that the private garden can help with. But also, of course, there's a lot of outreach that really helps out in the local community. And these are some of the master gardener projects that are going on around here. Rocky Ranch Elementary School, I know had some master gardeners working with the children there, and that's their garden. That was a few years ago. There's also the Oconee Veterans Park Pollinator Garden that was put in about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And that's definitely been raising a lot of awesome pollinators. And just one thing I wanted to mention too, that we always try to keep up with some of the labels so that people can be reminded about what plants, visitors can be able to see what plants they should plant and what you would recommend. And all of this really helps the next generation also be less afraid of the outdoors and embrace the outdoors. Also, just in the state itself, this is some of the community involvement that I've been able to get involved with. So there's a lot of volunteers as part of the state parks and the Friends of the State Parks, and also within our section, the wildlife conservation section. And this is a garden build that we had at Hard Labor Creek State Park. And it definitely, we had an emphasis on monarchs because I had raised a lot of monarchs to tag. And so the kids got involved in that. And that was the first time some of them were able to really see a butterfly in the hand. And because they're a little tougher and because there's tagging, we were able to do that. Also, another thing I wanted to mention is the Georgia Pollinator Partnership. And that is a partnership between lots of different organizations. And that link will show you some of the information about it. But pretty much what the goal is to see where those stepping stones are, those nectar resources are for pollinators. So the request is to put in your pollinator gardens so that we can see what Georgia gardeners are supplying. And this if we have time, I'll try to show you. This is our portal from DNR. This is, you can see, so there's a lot of more common insects out there, but then we also have a lot of pollinators that are less common. And in our portal, you can see some of the ones that are in the state and when they fly, when they, what their food resources are. Because just having the, being able to plant for them, you might actually end up attracting some of these more rare butterflies, moths, and other insects.
Hey, if you go out of presentation mode, you should be able to click on that if you wanted to do it now.
Okay.
I think oh, I didn't mean for you to get off track.
Oh, no, that's cool. Let me find it. Are you able to see what I'm doing?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Okay, so for this, oh, there we go. All right.
Oh, well.
It's a blank screen?
Yeah.
Please move this window away from the shared application. I don't know what that means.
It's probably the type of...
Does that show it?
No. No.
Oh.
It may be that you have to go to a different, like when you share the screen, you have to do a different setting.
Okay.
I was thinking it was easy and you could just go out of presentation mode.
Okay. So what I can do is I'm actually really close to the end.
Okay.
So I can just finish up and then I can go show you all of the different links at the same time. That might be the easiest.
That's great.
Okay. All right. So cool. I'm glad you're interested in this. I love the portal. This is actually one of the species that's on a portal, just to let you know. What we're trying to do is have some of the species specialists write accounts about the species. And this one was written by a professor out of Dalton State who works, he does a lot of work with moths and other Lepidoptera. And what's interesting is, so this was at one time a very widespread, though maybe not very common species. And now it's only been seen a few times in the last few years. And one of the plants, so it's hog peanut is what it had been thought to be reliant on, but a lot of people think it actually is thicket bean, which all of these look a lot, to be honest, they look a lot like kudzu to me. But the thicket bean's a little different. When you put the leaves together, they're like Velcro. And they, so when I asked about this particular plant, people were telling me it was really common. And then the botanists were like, well, we haven't really seen it. So it's probably a somewhat uncommon species. It is one of the state wildlife action plan species, which means we're trying to find out where it is and trying to support it and conserve it. But so it's an uncommon invertebrate, but probably also not a very common plant. Oh, why did I do that? I didn't mean to do that. All right, back. And here are some of the other rarer butterflies that are found on the portal. And I also just wanted to mention that a lot of you also help support the state. Thank you. We have a gorgeous license plate now that's been out for a couple of years of the Monarch and the Georgia Aster. And there it is. So this is another thing about monarchs, the regional research that's going on. At UGA, there's Project Monarch Health, which is out of Dr. Sonia Altizer's lab. And all of these would not be possible without community volunteer involvement, because all of these different eyes, and there's just too much obviously for a few people to do, but with the community all getting together and working on it, it makes all the difference. Journey North is also a big regional and national organization that's a nonprofit that tracks migration. So they track migrations of the monarch, they track migrations of the right whales, they track migrations of hummingbirds, lots of different species. But Georgia DNR, Project Monarch Health, the Dr. Sonia Altizer, and also Monarchs across Georgia this past year got together and we started, this is my little animation. We have created a monarch overwintering group where we are trying to work together to see whether there are monarchs that are overwintering in Georgia and also some of the southeastern states, and if these populations are important for monarch conservation and how important they would be, or if these are just really mixed up monarchs that are in Georgia during the winter and in other states during the winter for some unknown reason, such as breeding at the wrong time. National outreach. So Rosalind Carter is a really awesome supporter of pollinators. And so now across the United States now, there is the Rosalind Carter Butterfly Trail, which started in her hometown. And I've put Journey North here also because they are also a national organization in terms of butterflies. NAB, the North American Butterfly Association. It's a great organization full of a lot of volunteers. And there's butterfly counts that go on with them in different parts of the state. And you can get in contact with them if you're interested. And that picture in the middle is a tag butterfly. And that was actually one of my tag butterflies. That's at Hardlaver Creek State Park. And that butterfly is sharing sharing a plant right now with a bumblebee. And it's ready to head south, hopefully. And globally, I also wanted to mention this iNaturalist tool, which I'm going to show you all, is just a really amazing tool that is now being used internationally to look at what's out there, all volunteer, community supported, and it's a great tool for out in the garden, because one of the things about it too is it helps you learn. Like it's something that you can just take a picture of something, pull up suggestions of what it is, and then it goes into a database. And for people that are doing invertebrate research, it's really invaluable, because now we can see, based on what people are putting in, what plants are out there, what pollinators and different invertebrates are out there, and when they're out there. So everybody that can work, it's really easy to use, and I'll show you. And I believe this is actually the last slide. Yes, that's my contact information. So get in touch with me whenever you would, anytime. But I also will, I know we're really on, there's not a lot of time, so I can switch out of this and try to show you some of these links. So I'm going to stop sharing, I guess, and go back to some of these. And Joanna, while I'm doing that, if you have anything that you want to, anything in the chat.
Yeah, so we did have one other question referring to pesticides and whatnot. Abby asked if we should be worried about the neonicotinoids. I always mispronounce this. Neonicotinoids or other insects in store-bought plants.
Yes. So
I don't know if you found anything in that your research
Right.
about all that.
So the suggestion is that some of the places that are more of there's some places that are recommended in terms of having more of a knowledge of the background of the plants. So people like going to places like some of the smaller retailers that grow organic plants and ones that advertise that they don't have the neonicotinoids in the plant. One of the problems is that a lot of the people that actually are distributing in some of the larger stores, they might not know necessarily because they're not tagged that they have them. So like they might think they're selling pollinator plants, but they might not know what the history is. So it is an issue. I do have a flyer that I can also add in, which it was made up about milkweed resources in Georgia, but it also has different suggestions of places where plants have known backgrounds of, so they can be purchased there more safely. And I can add that in if you like.
Yeah, and even if you want to send that to me, I can put that in the post-class email with the notes. I'm happy to send any links or anything like that you have that you think people would be interested in.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely. And it also is going to tell you like the different regions of Georgia, and if you're planting milkweed, what varieties, what species would be good to plant in those areas.
Awesome.
So here, this is, do you see this? It's our biodiversity portal.
Yep.
You don't see it, Dan? Okay. I'm going to hit stop share again. I'm going to share screen. I put it on there. And you don't see it?
I see the different tiles that say.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's exactly what I want. Okay. All right. So I didn't push the link right there, but this link would get you there. This is I probably did push the link earlier. Okay. So this you can go into, and so here we are. It gives you options of different taxa. If you want to look at insects, you can go by list. You can go by location. Let's see, county. You can go by here. I'm going to find exactly where I am. Here I am right now, and I can get a list. I should be able to get a list. Okay, there we go. I shouldn't have been pushing in the purple. Oh, we have absolutely nothing here right now. Let me go somewhere else in the state. There we go. There we go. There's a list of species that have been verified as being in the county at some point. Like the rusty patch bumblebee, I would say that there's unfortunately not a very good chance of seeing it, but at some point, these are species that have been in that county. And here we go to the full profile. for the rusty patch bumblebee. And there's information about it. So I'm going to go to, so that's one way. You can look at the portal to see where you're located and what might be there. I'm also going to go into the portal and let me just put in a species like the Diana fritillary. It should pop, there we go. Okay, so here you'll see pictures of the Diana fritillary. It gives you a description. It gives you information in terms of the state. And this thing here, element occurrences, is kind of like how many populations are in Georgia that we're aware of. And that could be populations in the past. It's not necessarily current populations, but it's based on observations. It will give you the habitat information, the diet. Here we go. Life history, and also when you might see them out there. Threats. So this is a resource for some of the less common species. And here, this one was written to try to distinguish between different species and show you the differences between the Diana fritillarians, the pipeline swallowtail, and some of the other similar looking butterflies. Let me see, another resource that I want, here we go. Did that show up as iNaturalist, Dan? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is this is iNaturalist. And I'd mentioned this in terms of global. That was the picture with global. You can do it, you can use it as an app. This is me. This is mainly my garden and places around here. But you can put in a picture. You just basically can upload your pictures by phone or on the computer. You put it in, and so here we go. Here's a fiery skipper I saw. And what happens is you don't necessarily have to identify it on your own. You can put in what you believe. You can put in, where is it? Let me see. This one's already kind of looked at. Let me find a different species that nobody's looked at yet. Okay, here we go. So here, observation, there's a field where you can say, oh, here it is, suggestion identification. So I just put this in, and it's not me giving suggestions. It's actually based on artificial intelligence. It's just in general, similar looking species that have been seen in the area. So you can put that in, you can say that you think that's it. You upload it, and then somebody else that might be a specialist in that particular species or taxa might come in and verify what you've seen. So it's not really considered to be of research grade until there's been a couple verifications on it. The person who originally put it in and believes that that's what it is, and then somebody who's come in afterwards. And I've seen from personal use that it really does seem to be a lot of times the people that wrote the book on that come in and they'll verify, or they are able to teach me by saying, hey, I don't think that's what it is. There's a spot that's different, and maybe the legs are different. And so why don't you look back and what do you think? Do you think it's this? Everybody's really nice. So that's another really neat resource. I wanted to, let's see, the gap map is another thing. I'm just going to show you all. So this is one of, I think I put this as regional or state. This might have been state, the Georgia Pollinator Partnership, and the links in there. And these are all the different organizations here that got together for this. And this is the one where you can upload your garden and give a little description, and it's basically, it's getting an idea of where their stepping stones are across the state of Georgia. Oh, and there was another one I really wanted to show you all, which was, let's see where that is. Maybe I don't have it up. I was hoping I'd have it up. Ah, okay. Here. This is the link that I was showing. Is that showing up, Dan? No? Okay. Let's see if it shows up again. All right, here we go. Does that work? Okay. Okay, so this is the link which helps you decide, which can be a good resource for helping decide what types of plants you might be interested in planting. And you can, when the internet is fast enough, push on something like this, okay? And then, for example, let's say you're interested in the Gulf fritillary, they like passion flower, and you can save and say you can make a list and add that to your list of plants that you'd like to consider planting. And you can just go through, and there's a lot of different options, and that can give you some sort of idea of what you might want to plant. So those were some of the resources that I wanted to show you. Okay.
Those are awesome.
Cool. Thanks. I'm gonna
iNaturalist is like the naturalist social media. I actually did not know much about it, but that is super fun looking.
It's so much fun. It really is. I mean, for some
Especially when
people,
you're
it's a lot of
traveling
fun.
and
For me,
stuff.
it's a lot of fun. For
yeah.
other people, I try to push them to do it, but it's great in the garden.
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, did anyone have any other questions before we kind of wrap it up a bit? I had a couple things I wanted to bring up, but I don't want to miss anyone's questions. And Anna, if you had any final thoughts, I don't want to interrupt you either.
No, I've talked a lot. Thanks.
Well, no, everything you said was, I mean, it flew by. That was super good presentation. Thank you for the info. And we've had a few people already in the chat say great info. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. And if you want to contact me. Joanna's going to send out everything I gave, which has a lot of links, but yeah, definitely. I have my information in there. Happy to hear from you.
Awesome. And can you see my screen that says,
yes.
Oh, wait, there's more. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay, well, anyone keep putting stuff in the chat if you have any questions. I didn't see any though. I just wanted to mention we have a post-class evaluation. If you don't mind taking that, I will send the link to that in the post-class email. But if you want to scan that QR code with your phone and go ahead and take it now, or you can take it with the link that I sent previously or after the class, I'll give you plenty of opportunities to take it. But we really do enjoy reading those evaluations, and we do take your comments and apply them to our future planning. And I also wanted to mention a very timely event that's coming up in August is the Great Georgia Pollinator Census. So the UGA Extension and the UGA Urban Ag, Center for Urban Agriculture hosts this pollinator census, but it goes all across Georgia. It's what they call citizen science. So you can do your own census by counting the pollinators. They have directions on their website, but it's August 20th through 21st. And anyone can participate, but it's essentially you're counting the pollinators in your yard. If you don't have pollinator plants or pollinators in your yard, or like you live in an apartment and all you have is a porch, there are plenty of other places that you can count at, like parks. You can even come to our office, our demonstration and teaching garden, which we will be advertising on our social media, and we'll be advertising in our newsletter and whatnot. And you can come count at our garden. If you don't have a space, you can go count at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia. Lots of places that you can participate in. But if you want to know more information about the census overall, you can visit ggapc.org. That stands for Great Georgia Pollinator Census.org. But we'll also be posting stuff. So if you just want to stay in the loop with us, we'll be giving a lot of information the weeks leading up to that. And last but not least, our next Green Thumb lecture will be on fall vegetable gardening. So you can register the same way you registered for this class. And I will leave it at that. If y'all are interested, we did record this lecture. So if you want the recording for this, shoot me an email. I'll have, you'll get my email in the post-class email. But if you did not register and you got the link somehow this evening, please feel free to email me and I'll make sure that you get the post-class email. Let me make sure I see some chats. Okay. Yeah, no more questions. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Anna. That was awesome.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, no, me too. This is great. I know we haven't given a talk like this in a while, so we definitely need to add this to a regular lineup. I think it's a very important topic.
I agree. Thanks.
Everybody have a good night.